wise heads in Washington will be saying to President Trump, Mr. President, this is signaling by the Iranians. This is a calibrated response designed to actually tell you that's probably it.
Tim Marshall there is on the line now, and I'm happy to say, Tim, good to have you here.
Hello, John.
Tim, what's your analysis of what you've seen so far?
That it was probable Iran would respond. If Iran wanted to respond in a manner which possibly meant that there would not then be the roof collapsing on them, they would choose a target in which it was extremely unlikely they would kill anybody. The Al Udeid air base, the Americans have withdrawn a lot of troops over the past week. They've taken about 40 of their planes away from this air base over the past 10 days. And somebody, and I suspect it was the Iranians, let it be known, we're going to bomb that airbase tonight, hours in advance. All the people were in the bunkers. They only fired probably 6, maybe 7 missiles. There are THAAD, these air defense systems, but both the Qataris and the Americans have, which took out every single one of the missiles coming in. Nobody died, probably no injury. Therefore, I think it is reasonable to guess, and that's all it is, that this is calibrated to send a message to the Americans.
Yes.
You know, that's it. But being able to tell some of the Iranian public, where the noble Iranian nation has fought back. They've already said they've pulverized the base. They haven't.
Yeah, okay. And it's also, I want to bring Katie Bowles in, who's joined us now live on the line, Washington editor from DC. Welcome to you, Katie.
Thank you.
Katie, I wonder what you can tell us. The Situation Room meeting is going on now, presumably. The Times is reporting or re-reporting suggestions that Iran coordinated the attack on the airbase in Qatar with Qatari officials to minimise casualties, which would be consistent with the idea of wanting to contain the fallout from this, while making the gesture of retaliation, which was widely expected. Are you picking up anything more, Katie?
Yeah, I mean, that's the readout so far. And therefore, I think the big question here in Washington is how does Donald Trump then respond to that? Because, of course, if that is the case, then it looks as though there is an attempt to try and not escalate this further. But you go back to what Donald Trump said on Saturday night in that brief statement after the action, where he was flanked behind him by his 3 most senior members of his cabinet. And he said they didn't want any response. He said that this is the time for peace. And if not, the US was more than ready to retaliate, and said the next retaliation, if Iran responds, could be more lethal. And since then, we've also had Donald Trump tweeting a bit about regime change, saying it gets a bad name, but perhaps in Iran this might be needed, which has really spooked parts of his base. We know that Donald Trump is going to be attending a national Security Council meeting shortly. And I think that in the Situation Room, you have Pete Hegseth. So the question is, does Donald Trump see this as Iran trying to do something to save some face, or is it an escalation? And I think the jury is out on that in terms of how the president might respond. And
it's too early to know, Casey, I suppose, whether or not the president will now travel to The Hague for the NATO summit tomorrow.
But exactly. And we did see, obviously, last week how the Middle East changed his travel plans when he left Canada early. Will it be the case once more that Donald Trump makes a decision that the Middle East is such that he is in a better position to be in Washington, D.C., where he can be briefed in terms of these confidential materials, in terms of having all the intelligence available, being in the Situation Room? That will be a factor that his team are thinking about when it comes to whether to head to NATO as planned.
Okay, and Tim Marshall, we're talking about the scale of a response from America. Is it pretty much beyond doubt that there will be a response of some kind?
I'm not convinced, John. I agree with Katie that we can't know. The jury's out. And the wise heads in Washington will be saying to President Trump, Mr. President, this is signaling by the Iranians. This is a calibrated response designed to actually tell you that's probably it. So if he listens to those wise heads, then there has to be a form of words for both sides that there isn't now a response. Because the Americans are perfectly capable of bringing the entire house down upon the regime. But he doesn't want to, as Katie knows better than I. There is domestic problems in the USA with the MAGA base about getting involved in foreign wars. So, there are reasons for him not to respond to this. As I said at the beginning, it looks very likely that the Iranians calibrated and messaged everybody in advance to make sure there would be no casualties. Now, if I'm wrong, and if tonight there is wave upon wave of attacks on bases in the UAE, in Syria, in Iraq, that would be different. But it hasn't happened so far. There is a precedence for this, John. In 2020, the Americans, under President Trump, killed the head of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard whilst he was on a visit to Baghdad. Iran had to respond. It pretty much phoned up the Americans and said, look, we're going to bomb this base in Iraq in 2 or 3 hours' time. You might want to all take cover. They did that. Nobody died. There were 30 wounded. And that was it. It was all over. So there is a precedent for this. I know that tensions are much, much higher than they were in 2020. I'm just giving you the scenario that Mr. Trump may remember that, may listen to the people that will probably be telling him, if they assess it the way I do, and I think Katie does as well. Yeah. Look, President, they're saying to you, that's it.
And that's really important context. And Katie, I guess, against that background, President Trump, although he's been very, very clearly set on taking on the threat of a nuclear weapon being developed by Iran, he gave the go-ahead to the bombing at the weekend and so on. He's been, to that extent, ready to defy that the isolationist end of his MAGA base. He would be, one imagines, Katie, you tell me, looking for a way, maybe before too long, to reconcile those differences.
Yes, and I think there is a position that Donald Trump can hold when it comes to the action that America took on Saturday night and keeping the vast majority of his MAGA base, including the isolationists, on side. And that is one of limited action. You very quickly on Saturday saw figures in the MAGA sphere, such as Matt Gaetz, his one-time pick for Attorney General, before he had to pull out, saying, Donald Trump has missed a piece. This is meant to be a one-off thing. What's really spooked some of these supporters is, the recent message about regime change has bad press around it, but if Iran doesn't listen, perhaps they do need to change leader. And then you have Caroline Leavitt, the White House press secretary, talking about those comments this morning on the press in the US. So if Donald Trump finds himself embroiled or dragged into further action, and you start to now get retaliatory strikes as a result, if this becomes an ongoing event, then it gets much harder for him to keep parts of the base on side, and that will be weighing on his mind too. But on the other hand, you also have an insult that Donald Trump has had leveled at him, which really gets to him, which is taco. This idea that he changes his mind, that he announces a plan of action and then goes back on it. And when this was put to him in a briefing, a week or so ago, he said, that was very nasty that someone had said it. And lots of people worry that he doesn't want to look as though he is, changing positions. So could he be left tempted to double down? Yeah. So I think those are the two factors to be aware of in this.
Yeah, he's not famously thick-skinned. Adam Bolton.
Well, I think it's important to note that in all of this, there are clearly black channels underway through the Qataris, the Iranians. We know that the Americans and the Iranians have spoken to each other directly. What Donald Trump said on the night of the use of the bunker busters was there will either be peace or there'll be tragedy for Iran far greater than what we have witnessed over the last 8 days. So perhaps the possibility will be that in due course there'll be negotiations of some kind, which was clearly acceptable to Donald Trump before the Israelis succeeded in forcing his hand. And so it may not be the moment where he decides to order, tragedy for Iran beyond far greater than everything that we've seen. Yeah. And if he gets as far as negotiating table, he will certainly claim to be the victor for A, in his view, having eliminated Iran's nuclear program, and B, got them to the table to basically establish that on a permanent basis. So, I mean, there is a positive course of action that one can see emerging from this.